A heart attack kills your heart muscle slowly, not in an instant, not all at once. It kills a wedge of it from the inside out, and the border keeps moving for hours. Most people picture a heart attack as a switch. The artery closes, the heart stops. One moment, and it is over. What actually happens is a line creeping through the wall of your heart, one layer at a time, while you are still awake to feel it. So why does the muscle die from the inside first? Why does some of the damage happen after the blood comes back? And why does the person with the worse artery sometimes lose less muscle? Start with a fact about your heart that almost nobody is told. Your heart moves about 5 liters of blood every minute. None of it feeds the heart. The blood inside the chambers is cargo. It is passing through. The muscle itself is fed by 3 small arteries that sit on the outside surface, draped over it like cord. They send branches straight down into the wall, so the supply arrives from the outside and has to push inward, which means the layer closest to the blood in the chamber is the last one the supply reaches. That layer has a name, the subendocardium. It is the innermost sheet of heart muscle, the one that lines the pumping chamber itself, and it is in the worst position twice over. Every time your heart squeezes, it squeezes its own blood vessels shut. The pressure built up inside the wall is highest at the inner surface, so the inner layer is crushed hardest and fed last, which leads to something strange about how your heart is supplied. It can only feed itself while it is relaxing, between beats. A racing heart is a hungry heart because the faster it goes, the less time it spends refilling its own supply. Now the artery closes. Somewhere upstream, a plaque has torn and a clot has filled the channel in minutes. Everything downstream of that point stops receiving blood. And the first thing that happens is not death. It is silence. Within about a minute, that piece of muscle stops squeezing. It is still alive. Every cell in it is still intact. It has simply stopped working because contraction is the most expensive thing a heart cell does, and it is the first thing dropped. On an ultrasound, you can watch it happen. A section of the wall goes still while the rest of the heart keeps beating around it. If you want the rest of what happens inside that wall, this channel takes one mechanism apart every video. The dying starts about 20 minutes later, and it starts at the inner surface, exactly where you would expect by now. The experiments that first mapped this measured it at 3 points. 40 minutes in, about a quarter of the muscle at risk is already dead, in a thin band lining the chamber. 3 hours in, it is 70%. By 6 hours, 72. Read those last 2 again. Between hour 3 and hour 6, almost nothing changes. Nearly all of the damage is done in the first 3 hours, and after that, there is very little left to save. Those numbers come from dog hearts, and in a person they can run slower, for a reason we are about to get to. The researchers who mapped it gave the pattern a name that describes it exactly: the wavefront, a front of cell death moving outward through the wall of your heart at a speed you can measure. This is what the phrase "time is muscle" actually means. It is not a slogan. It is a boundary moving through tissue, and every minute it moves further. But there is a faster way to die than the wavefront, and it does not wait 6 hours. Heart muscle does 2 jobs at once. It squeezes, and it carries the electrical signal that tells the next piece of muscle when to squeeze. Starving cells leak potassium and stop holding a stable charge. So the territory that has just gone quiet is also the territory that has started conducting badly. And a patch of muscle that conducts badly, sitting inside muscle that conducts normally, is exactly the condition for a signal to start circling instead of passing through. The beat breaks into a tremor. The chambers stop filling. Output falls to nothing in seconds. This is ventricular fibrillation, and it is what kills most of the people who die of a heart attack outside a hospital. It usually arrives in the first hour, which means the most dangerous part of a heart attack happens long before the muscle damage is finished, often before anyone has decided it is serious enough to call for help. A defibrillator does not restart a stopped heart. It stops a heart that is quivering, so the heart's own pacemaker can start it again cleanly. Which brings us to something that sounds backwards. Two people have the same artery close at the same point. One of them has had a severe narrowing there for years. The other had a mild one that tore without warning. The one with the worse artery can lose less muscle, because a narrowing that develops slowly gives the heart time to build a detour around it. Small vessels widen, connect end to end, and start carrying blood into the territory from a neighboring artery. Collaterals. They are the heart's own bypass, grown over years out of vessels that were already there. They do not carry enough to keep the muscle working, but they carry enough to slow the wavefront down, so the person whose artery closed suddenly with a vessel that looked almost clean can end up with the bigger infarct. Meanwhile, you are feeling something, and it is probably not where the problem is. Your heart has no sharp pain sensors of its own. The distress signal leaves on nerves that enter your spinal cord at one particular level. The nerves from your left arm, your shoulder, your jaw, and your upper back arrive at that same level. Your brain has no way to tell those inputs apart, so it puts the pain where it has been wrong before. That is why a heart attack can arrive as an aching arm, or a jaw that will not settle, or a weight on the chest that feels like indigestion. Now the ambulance arrives, and the artery gets opened. Blood pours back into tissue that has been starving for 2 hours, and a share of the final damage happens right there, in the first minutes after the blood returns. Cells that were injured but still alive die during the rescue. Calcium floods in. The mitochondria swell and burst. The cell tears itself apart using the very energy it had been waiting for. This is called reperfusion injury. By some estimates, it accounts for as much as half of the muscle that ends up dead. Opening the artery is still the right thing to do, by an enormous margin. But the rescue is not free. And this is also how anyone knows the muscle died at all. The dead cells spill their contents into the blood passing by. One of those contents is a protein called troponin. Troponin is part of the machinery that makes a muscle cell contract, and the heart's version is found nowhere else in your body. So if it turns up in your bloodstream, it can only have come from heart muscle that broke open. It starts rising within a few hours and stays up for days. That single measurement is most of what separates a heart attack from a bad scare. Whatever muscle died in those hours is gone permanently. Your heart does not rebuild it. Heart muscle cells do renew, but barely. Carbon dating of human hearts put the rate at about 1% a year at age 25. By 75, it is under 0.5%. Across an entire lifetime, fewer than half the cells you were born with are ever replaced. So a wedge of dead muscle is not repaired. It is replaced with scar. Collagen laid down by cells that are not muscle at all. Scar is strong. It holds the wall together, and that is the only reason the heart does not tear open at the weak spot. But it does not squeeze, and it does not carry a signal. So now your heart has a patch that cannot pump and cannot pass on the beat. The rest of the muscle takes over the work. It stretches. It thickens. The chamber slowly changes shape to keep the output the same. That process has a name too. Remodeling. Remodeling is the heart rebuilding its own shape to cover for the piece that stopped working. And it works for years. Then it stops working, and that is where a large share of heart failure comes from. The heart attack was one afternoon. What it started can take a decade to arrive. So the muscle dies from the inside out, because the inside is the last place the blood reaches and the first place the pressure crushes. Some of it dies during the rescue itself, and what is lost turns into a scar that holds the wall but never beats again. There is one more thing about all of this. For any of it to be stopped, somebody has to know it is happening. And in more than 1 in 4 people, the whole sequence runs from beginning to end, and nobody ever recognizes it as a heart attack.